Hi everyone, it's Anne. I am finally back in the studio after 11 months. There was a family illness and I needed to take some time off. So thank you so much for waiting for me to come back, and a special thanks to those who reached out to me wondering where I've been. So this is the first piece that I did since I came back. Um, in my new studio, I'm going to share a couple of pics with you. um, I did two stations, one with a faux wall to stand the canvases up instead of installing easels on the wall, and one for overhead where you just see my hands. So this is the one for standing the canvases up, and this is the one where I sit and the camera is above. So for this piece, I use the station where I stand the canvases up against a faux wall. And I'm preparing the canvas with gesso and then with Mod Podge, because I'm laying down some collage papers. Not necessarily to do a collage piece because it's abstract. It could include collage, but I think there is a distinction between a collage and an abstract, but it could be an abstract collage, which I do plenty of. But the reason why I'm laying down the papers is so not only does it have texture, but I'm going to rip through and get those layers. I'm going to actually put holes in the textures. And so I'm spraying with water so that it's nice and loose. And right now I'm using a brush just to lay down some black. This left side of the canvas is going to be the darker side. And this here I'm adding some brown, and the color palette is mostly black and cream with a little bit of brown and gray and some slate blue. And we'll talk about colors in a bit. So this is the gray. And so I'm just going over this left half with the black and the brown and the gray. And even though I add the brown on this side, it's going to get covered with cream and buttermilk acrylics and white acrylic and joint compound. But right now I'm just laying down just a little bit of brown as a base. So I bounce back and forth. Sometimes I use the brush, other times I use the sponge. And here I'm adding some markings with the scraping tool, just for some energy, some interest. And I'm not ripping through anything. The paint is still very wet, so it's very easy. And now I'm kind of adding more pressure to kind of expose the papers underneath and to distress. But I go a lot harder later. And this is like it's silver marlin, so it's like a kind of like a slate blue. And I think it's a good shade of blue for an abstract like this because it's still warm. And this is cream, and I'm using a sponge brush, and I pretty much go over all the brown. So first I'm going vertically, and then right over here I just go a little erratic and just get some energy going. This is collage paper that has some cast off from previous projects, and I'm gluing that down using my roller. And this is old book paper. It's 30 years old. I'm a retired resume writer, so I have about 100 books. So I don't get too precious. Now this is joint compound, and it goes on kind of like a putty, and it takes a while to dry. I let it dry for about 2 hours. And it's kind of like sheetrock. compound for the joints, joint compound. After 2 hours, I sanded it. So I'm going to speed this part up because it took about 5 minutes. And I sand it very hard and I smooth the entire canvas. Like if you close your eyes and you rubbed your hand over the canvas, you wouldn't feel anything. It would just be completely smooth like glass. But when you look at it, you could see all of the layers and the textures. So I'm gonna bring the canvas closer to the camera so you can get a really good look at all of the textures. Here I'm just brushing away all of the sheetrock dust from the table and the canvas. And this is the close-up. You can see all of the distressing, the variations in the paint. You can see all the joint compound textures. And so this is kind of like a burnt orange, and this is like a very dark brown. So what I'm doing here is creating a cluster. So we have all the dark on the left going all the way down like a panel, and then you have 2/3 of it, different shades of white and cream going down. This is a roller, foam roller, so I'm just going over the lighter area with white acrylic just to brighten it up. And then I'll go into that later with buttermilk just to warm it up a little bit. But right here where the dark meets the light, somewhere around the middle horizon, a little bit above it, I'm creating a cluster. A cluster is just kind of like a potpourri of marks and patterns and colors and lines, and you can do anything. You can add black and white mixed with colors. Here I'm adding the buttermilk with a paper towel, going over it just to warm it up a little bit so you have those different variations of those white and beige and cream colors. This is an oil pastel stick, so it completely interrupts everything, because you have all of the neutral colors and then you have the mid-tone with the slightly cool blue. And then it's like, pow, this saffron color. And I was just experimenting, but in the end, I decided not to run with it. So I ended up going over it. So, spoiler alert. But I did replace it with some stenciling so that the cluster was still interesting. And here I'm just going over the black to add more contrast. And then I carry the black over to the right side. And then I go all around it, dry brushing to add texture. And then what was left on the sponge, I just went over that blue just to tone it down and distress it a little bit. So I already have some scraping there, but now I'm using my razor blade to rip through all those papers that I added in the very beginning, all the way down to the cardboard of the canvas board. And so you could see how thick that layer is. This is another oil pastel stick to add some yellow ochre. And this is cardboard that I use as a palette, and it has paint on it. So I'm peeling away the top layer and I glue it to the cluster for some collage. So like what I was saying before, there's collage and there's abstracts and there's abstract collages, and you can do as much or as little as you want. So with this cluster, it's mostly browns and black, but it has a little bit of that blue in there, the bright color. And I'm adding the blue, the gray blue back in because it got lost. And I'm using a sponge. I prefer tools, sponges, but I like brushes too. I guess they all have their place. So I really was on the fence about that bright color, that orange. And that's yellow ochre, oil pastel. And here I'm stenciling a cream just to kind of brighten up that cluster. And now for the wow factor, I suppose, the energy. There's these lines. They're total chaos. They're like barbed wire fence. It's a precision bottle with watered down black acrylic. And I just hit the canvas and I let the drips happen. And then once the drips subsided, then I used a brush to go over the lines to make them a little thicker. And then I went into the lines with the razor blade. And all the way down to the quick, and pulled out the fibers of the canvas. That's my idea of distressing. You could see how I'm pulling those fibers. And so this area was probably the most worked area, that cluster. And that red, as I mentioned before, I ended up going over it, and then I stenciled over it again so that the area was still a little busy, but not too quiet. And I'm just touching up that other cluster, which is not as busy as the one on the left. And it is done. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing it. If you have any questions about my process or materials, leave a comment below. I would love to hear from you. And if you're new to my channel and you enjoyed the content, I hope you'll consider subscribing. Until the next video, take care. I'll see you soon.